Chapter 25 of Colonel Quaritch, V.C. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Colonel Quaritch, V.C. by H. Rider Haggart. Chapter 25. The Squire gives his consent. Edward Cossey did not come away from the scene of his engagement in a very happy or triumphant tone of mind. Ida's bitter words stung like whips, and he understood, as she clearly meant he should understand, that it was only in consideration of the money advanced that she had consented to become his wife. Now, however satisfactory it may be to be rich enough to purchase your heart's desire in this fashion, it is not altogether soothing to the pride of a 19th century man to be continually reminded by the thought that he is a buyer in the market and nothing but a buyer. Of course he saw clearly enough that there was an object in all this. He saw that Ida, by making obvious her dislike, wished to discuss him with the bargain and escape from an alliance of which the prospect was hateful to her. But he had no intention of being so easily discouraged. In the first place, his passion for the woman was as a devouring flame, eating ever at his heart. In that, at any rate, he was sincere. He did love her so far as his nature was capable of love, or at any rate he had the keenest desire to make her his wife. A delicate-minded man would probably have shrunk from forcing himself upon a woman under parallel circumstances, but Edward Cossey did not happen to fall into that category, and as a matter of fact such men are rare. Few even among the gentler classes are there who, where women are concerned, will allow delicacy to weigh against their passion or their interest. Another thing that he took into account was that Ida would probably get over her dislike. He was a close observer of women in a cynical and half contemptuous way, and he remarked, or thought that he remarked, a curious tendency among them to submit with comparative complacency to the inevitable whenever it happened to coincide with their material advantage. Women, he argued, have not, as a class, outgrown the recollections of their primitive condition, when their partners for life were chosen for them by lot as the chance of battle. They still recognise the claims of the wealthiest or strongest, and their love of luxury and ease is so keen that if the nest they lie in is only soft enough, they will not grieve long over the fact that it was not of their own choosing. Arguing from these premises, therefore, he came to the conclusion that Ida would soon get over her repugnance to marrying him when she found how many comforts and good things marriage with so rich a man would place at her disposal, and would learn to look on him with affection and gratitude as the author of her gilded ease, if for no other reason, and so indeed she might have done had she been of another and very common stamp. But unfortunately for his reasoning, there are members of her sex who are by nature of an order of mind superior to these considerations, and who realise that they have but one life to live, and that the highest form of happiness is not dependent upon money or money's worth, but rather upon the indulgence of mental aspirations and those affectations which, when genuine, draw nearer to holiness than anything else about us. Such a woman, more especially if she be already possessed with an affection for another man, does not easily become reconciled to her lot, however quietly she may endure it, and such a woman was Ida de la Molle. Edward Cossey, on returning to Boisingham on the evening of his engagement, at once wrote and posted a note to the Squire, saying that he would call on him on the following morning on a matter of business. Accordingly, about 10:30, he arrived and was shown into the vestibule, where he found the old gentleman standing with his back to the fire and plunged in reflection. "Well, Mr. de la Molle," said Edward, rather nervously, as soon as he had shaken hands, "I don't know if Ida has spoken to you about what took place between us yesterday." "Yes," he said, "yes, she told me something to the effect that she had accepted a proposal of marriage from you, subject to my consent, of course, but really the whole thing is so sudden that I have hardly had time to consider it." "It is very simple," said Edward. "I am deeply attached to your daughter, and I have been so fortunate as to be accepted by her. Should you give your consent to the marriage, I may as well say at once that I wish to make the most liberal money arrangement in my power. I will make Ida a present of the mortgage bonds that I hold over this property, and she may put them in the fire. Further, I will covenant on the death of my father, which cannot now be long delayed, to settle £200,000 upon her absolutely. Also, I shall be prepared to agree if I have a son, and he should wish to do so, he shall take the name of de la Molle." "I am sure," said the Squire, turning round to hide his natural gratification at these proposals, "your offers on the subject of settlements are of a most liberal order, and of course, so far as I am concerned, Ida will have this place, which may one day be again more valuable than it is now." "I am glad that they meet with your approval," said Edward, "and now there is one more thing I want to ask you, Mr. de la Molle, and which I hope, if you will give your consent to the marriage, you will not raise any objection to. That is, that our engagement should not be announced at present. The fact is," he went on hurriedly, "my father is a very peculiar man, and has a great idea of my marrying somebody with a large fortune. Also, his state of health is so uncertain that there is no possibility of knowing how he will take anything. Indeed, he is dying. The doctors told me that he might go off any day, and that he cannot last for another 3 months. If the engagement is announced to him now, at the best I shall have a great deal of trouble, and at the worst he might, if he happened to take a fancy against it, make me suffer in his will." Said the Squire, "I don't quite like the idea of a projected marriage with my daughter, Miss de la Molle of Honham Castle, being hushed up as though there was something discreditable about it, but still there may be peculiar circumstances in the case that would justify me in consenting to that course. You are both old enough to know your own minds, and the match would be as advantageous to you as it could be to us, for even nowadays a family, and I may even say personal appearance, still go for something where matrimony is concerned. I have reason to know that your father is a peculiar man, very peculiar. Yes, on the whole, though I don't like hole and corner affairs, I shall have no objection to the engagement not being announced for the next month or two." "Thank you for considering me so much," said Edward with a sigh of relief. "Then am I to understand that you give your consent to our engagement?" The Squire reflected for a moment. Everything seemed quite straight, and yet he suspected crookedness. His latent distrust of the man, which had not been decreased by the scene of 2 nights before, for he never could bring himself to like Edward Cossey, arose in force and made him hesitate when there was no visible grounds for hesitation. He had, as has been said, an instinctive insight into character that was almost feminine in its intensity, and it was lifting a warning finger before him now. "I don't quite know what to say," he replied at length. "The whole affair is so sudden, and to tell you the truth, I thought that Ida had bestowed her affections in another direction." Edward's face darkened. "I thought so too," he answered, "until yesterday I was so happy as to be undeceived. I ought to tell you, by the way," he went on, running away from the covert falsehood in his last words as quickly as he could, "how much I regret that I was the cause of that scene with Colonel Quaritch, more especially as I find that there is an explanation of the story against him. The fact is, I was foolish enough to be put out because he beat me out shooting, and also because, well, I was jealous of him." "Ah, yes," said the Squire rather coldly, "a most unfortunate affair. Of course I don't know what the particulars of the matter were, and it is no affair of mine, but speaking generally, I should say never bring an accusation of that sort against a man at all unless you are driven to it, and if you do bring it, be quite certain of your ground. However, that is neither here nor there. Well, about this engagement. Ida is old enough to judge for herself, and seems to have made up her mind. So, as I know no reason to the contrary, and as the business arrangements proposed are all that I could wish, I cannot see that I have any grounds for withholding my consent. So all I can say, sir, is that I hope you will make my daughter a good husband, and that you will both be happy. Ida is a high-spirited woman, and in some ways a very peculiar woman, but in my opinion she is greatly above the average of her sex, as I have known it, and provided you have her affection and don't attempt to drive her,